Good morning, friends.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Lloyd. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Janine. Hope things are going well at DSS.
It's never dull. It's when you get done with a program, the auditors show up. So, we're
Right.
always, keeping it real up here.
Yep. Well, it's internal audit week at the city of Durham, and our internal auditing department had a nice display. I think it's still up at community development. And one of the stories they found online was that with some of the CARES money in Seattle, Washington, $800,000 disappeared. Somebody had hacked one of the bank account of one of the nonprofits.
Oh dear.
And siphoned off $800,000 that was intended to help homeless people.
Oh my goodness.
So auditing is very important. Anyway, interesting story. Sad.
I'll be right back.
Well, good morning, Sally. Hanale, good morning, Danielle.
Good morning.
I'm going to be quiet now and let Jonathan take over.
Oh no, we'll give it a few more minutes here. Good morning to everybody. So a little fellowship up front is always a good thing.
If I
Okay, so we do have quorum. It is 10:03 a.m. and there is no time like the present. So I will go ahead and call us to order and welcome everybody to May's meeting of the Performance Management Subcommittee. We do have a couple of new folks here with us today, so I do want to introduce them. First off, I want to announce we do have a new liaison who's going to be working on our committee, and his name is Drew Wooten. And Drew, I'm going to put you on the spot and give you the chance to introduce yourself and say a few things if you'd like.
Yeah, hey, good morning, everyone. I recognize some familiar faces on here. It's good to see you all. My name is Drew Wotan. I'm the Assistant Director at Open Table Ministry. So yeah, I'm excited to be a part of this committee and help out in ways that I can learn and also contribute. So yeah, it's good to see you all.
Welcome. And then we also have with us Janice Washington. And Miss Washington, if you would just tell us who you are and what brings you to the meeting today. Welcome.
Thank you. Sure. So my name is Janice Washington. I'm became a member of the Homeless Service Advisory Committee back in February. And so I'm just trying to get an understanding of the various, I know there's various subcommittees. So I just saw that one was happening today and I wanted to pop in for a little while to kind of get more of an understanding of kind of what happens in these sub meetings.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, welcome, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have our agenda, and up first is approval of the previous two meetings minutes. And so does anybody have any questions or concerns or edits about the two meeting minutes from March and April? Do we need a moment or two?
Just a moment or two would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
This is Tracy. Can you
Look-
hear me?
Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Absolutely.
Because at this point I can't hear you, so it's probably on my end that I. Okay. All right. Yeah, I can't hear you. I'm going to log back out again. I've checked my volume levels. However,
I have
check my
my
speakers.
I have a question attributed to me is not entirely clear what it was that I was asking. I don't know if it's the transcription or
Sure.
it's part of my question. On page 2, it says, typically this committee of HSAC is going to see here is the set priority for the program that we would like to see, and depending on the applications, we would allocate the funds properly.
How should it have read?
What's that?
How should it have read?
That's a good question. I'm trying to understand what I was asking there. Let's see, we use my project that would start it. So typically this committee of HSAC is going to, is it just set? Is going to set priority for the program we would like to see?
That looks like that would make sense to me.
So maybe just eliminate the C here is the,
Okay.
and then the other line that I
I'm
have
going to try to log off and then log back on again. I apologize for the inconvenience.
and then the other minor edit is just at the end attributed to me. I agree that would help to understand. I think it's where as a community we are falling short.
Okay. And what page is
Just-
that?
It's at the very end. There just needs to be a space between where and as, because I think it's whereas as opposed to whereas.
Okay. Okay. Or we, yeah, where we as a community, okay. Oops. I am also gonna recommend that we, and Shay is our secretary. She has been unfortunately ill. I'm gonna recommend that we take out the part about her hospitalization, just to protect her privacy. She certainly typed these, and but you know, for the official record, I think it probably would be more appropriate if that was not in there. And then Shayna, of course, is no longer a member. She is, of course, a member of the public for purposes of this committee. So we got to take her name off as a member listed there. Are there any other changes? Do we need more time with April's minutes? Okay. Okay. So would anyone like to make a motion to adopt the minutes with the changes brought up by Sally, by myself?
I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay.
I'll
So-
second.
Okay, and any further discussion?
No.
Okay. If we will all just vote in the chat box here. Okay, all right, minutes are approved. Okay, on to the next item on the agenda, which will be a review of the scoring instrument for new projects. So certainly last month, Lloyd introduced the scorecard for new projects, or at least the proposed scorecard. And it is something we do need to adopt. And we've had a month to offer any suggested changes to Lloyd. Lloyd, have there been any recommended changes? Oh, you're muted.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. I will share my screen. I'm going to recommend one change that, let's see. Share that screen. Hopefully you can see the scorecard. Please confirm, perhaps Jonathan, that, okay, so I can report to the committee that it's too large, okay?
Zoom out.
Better too large than too small. How's that? Better? Still too large? Yes, no?
Looks fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think
okay
that
on
was,
my screen. I don't know if others are maybe having issues, but I mean, it looks normal on mine.
yeah, it looks normal now.
Okay. On Monday, the Policy and Planning Committee agreed to approve the recommendation of the department as the COC lead agency that the priority for the use of the housing bonus as well as the reallocated funds that will be available in the upcoming COC competition would be for projects that are available to meeting the definition of a dedicated plus project. And a dedicated plus project is one that is has a priority for people who are chronically homeless or for people that would not technically meet the definition of chronically homeless, but are very close to it. For example, people that had been chronically homeless prior to entering a permanent housing project, then had a recurring episode of homelessness, could be included in a dedicated plus project. Another group of people would be people who have more than a year of homelessness in the last 3 years, but they had the episodes of homelessness would have been less than 4, so maybe 2 or 3 episodes of homelessness. So those are some common examples. So that gives us a little more flexibility. So one change I'm recommending in the scorecard is on the screen now. It's on question 26. The prior question that you had seen in the review of this scorecard last month was, question was simply what percentage of the project's beds is dedicated for chronically homeless people. And I've suggested to add that what percentage of the project's beds is dedicated for chronically homeless or for an eligible dedicated plus project participant. So that would be, I think, a way of strengthening that question and aligning it more closely to the COC priority. One other question that did come up in the policy and planning meeting was how the scorecard reflects the priority, and the main area way we do that is under the project description. Question 5, which hopefully you can see now, asks, does the project address a priority that has been adopted by the Durham COC Board for permanent housing project applications? And we're certainly anticipating that the HSAC at its meeting next week will be approving the recommendation of the Policy and Planning Committee to permanent housing projects have a dedicated plus priority. So those are the only changes. I did not receive any changes or edits from any committee members, although people can sort of make recommended amendments to the scorecard at this time, or it can be approved as presented here.
Right. Do any members have any questions this morning? Well, one question I have is just as far as, procedure. If we are waiting on policy and planning, well, you said HSAC is going to, approve the recommendation next week, correct? Or is that policy and planning?
Right.
Okay. Does it?
Right.
Okay. I was just going to ask if it made sense for us to possibly wait to approve the scorecard until we know the priorities, or is the sense that this is going to pass next week and we could pretty confidently approve it today if members feel ready to approve it?
I feel pretty confident that the HSAC is going to approve the recommendation in our year's staffing, the HSAC, and having recommendations for funding priorities. We've never had a situation where the HSAC has not approved a funding priority, whether that priority has come from the COC lead agency or in the last couple of years since we've had the policy and committee, the planning committee making those recommendations. So I think we're confident that that policy priority, or that priority for funding, is going to be approved. One reason we'd like the committee to adopt the scorecard now is so that we can release the scorecard to the pre-applicants, organizations that are preparing and thinking about new project applications. We can incorporate this into the pre-application process, upload it to the Zoom Grants website, and publicize it to the organizations that are considering applying for new project funding in the 2022 competition. So we prefer to, even though we're not going to be using it until later this summer, we want to try to make it, make the organizations that are thinking about new project applications aware of how we're going to be scoring their new project applications.
One option, Jonathan, that the committee could do would be to vote to approve the scorecard conditional upon the approval of the priorities at HSAC. So if there's a concern about the appearance of like preempting the HSAC vote, that might be a way to resolve the, I agree with Lloyd that we feel confident that they'll be approved, but if the concern, is that it feels preemptive of an HSAC vote, then you could do a vote that says that we approve this conditional upon the priorities being approved by HSAC. And if the priorities are not approved by HSAC, then this would not apply, and we would review at the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, and my concern more is just, if something were to change at the last minute, and we've released the scorecard to the projects, and then all of a sudden something's changed, and then we've got to go back and fix it. So that would just be the one concern I would have is for the sake of not confusing our projects. Let's see here. The HSAC meeting is it next week?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, it is next week.
That. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the other thing too is, maybe we could just hold off. I mean, assuming that the committee passes this, perhaps we could just hold off on releasing it until that vote does pass. Do any members have any feelings on this?
No, I think whatever, you recommend as the process sounds fine.
Okay. So I guess, so I mean, I'm hearing from our staff very, very confident that this is going to pass. I personally, as your chair, like the idea of passing this conditionally upon the approval of the priorities, and then maybe just not release it yet until we know that vote has taken place and there have been no further changes.
We can do that, Jonathan. The pre-application period closes May 24th. So if it is approved on May 18th, organizations would still have several days to be aware of the scorecard prior to submitting a final pre-application. In actual applications for projects, again, would not be actually submitted until later this summer after HUD releases the notice of funding opportunity.
Okay. Yeah, I just would hate for there to be a surprise next week and then we have to go back.
Sure.
So, as the chair here, I can't make a motion, but if the committee feels comfortable to go ahead and adopt this, if somebody would like to make a motion. If we don't, then if somebody would make a motion, in the other way.
So I would, to make the motion to adopt it, provisional to the HSAC decision.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor by Sally Wilson to adopt the scorecard as is with the provision that is contingent upon the HSAC approving the priorities next week.
I second that motion.
Okay, we have a second from Drew on that. Any further discussion? Okay, if we could go ahead and vote in the chat box. Okay. All right, motion carries. The scorecard is adopted. Contingent
you.
on the vote next week. All right, so moving right along. The next item on our agenda is an orientation to HUD's Stella data visualization tool, and Lloyd is going to do that orientation for us.
I thought I was doing that after Analea's presentation, so give me a moment to pull that website up.
Yeah, if
It'll just take a moment.
if you need a moment, I mean, I can certainly flip those two things and we can have Hanalea go if that would be.
If Hanalea is ready, well, let's see here.
Yeah, I can go. That's fine.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that's absolutely okay. Hanalea, you have the floor for the quarterly system and entry point performance update, and glad to have you back as always.
I have this issue sometimes where it doesn't let me share and I have to leave and come back. So I guess whichever one of us resolves our issue first, I'm going to leave and come back.
okay.
If you
so
can
I'm-
also email me something, and I'm happy to share my screen if.
When I come back in, it'll let me share.
Okay.
Yeah,
No worries.
I'm ready. I'm ready to proceed. Jonathan.
Okay. All right. We'll let Lloyd proceed then. Back to Lloyd.
All right, so I'm sharing my screen, and this is a secure website called the Homelessness Data Exchange 2.0. And we've been wanting to orient this committee in particular to a function within this website called Stella P. And one clicking on Stella P up here on the right moves one. Hopefully you can see my screen. Jonathan, you can see it, correct? Yes.
Yep, I sure can. I can see it.
Okay, so this is the kind of homepage, and Stella P is a visualization tool that HUD has developed, and it takes our longitudinal system analysis data and illustrates, as it says here, how households move through the homeless system, and can be used to highlight outcome disparities, racial equity disparities, other disparities as well. HUD is still in the development of a second tool called Stella M, which would, as it says, explore how resource investment decisions amplify system capacity to end homelessness. So HUD has been working on getting Stella M developed for several years. Durham now has 4 years of longitudinal system analysis data within the Stella P module. This is going to be a quick orientation. I've worked, there's a lot of visualization resources and tools. You can see here the 4 years we have are, the most recent one is federal fiscal year 2021, and these years are again coinciding with the federal fiscal year. So the time frame you see here in this column is reporting 2021 is the time frame of October 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2021, which is the federal fiscal. The previous 4 fiscal years, so we're still in fiscal year 2022, and have ways to go. So now I'm getting a note that my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully you can still hear me. So I'm going to do some orientation to how you can look at the data for each of those 4 fiscal years by clicking on the data. And there's obviously more information on that homepage that you can read through at your leisure. Basically, the performance module is this, takes you to this page, and across the top you kind of see our Durham COC code, the name, the reporting period, and that this is an official longitudinal system analysis submission. And then there are 5 menus, 5 kind of chapters, as it were, that you can click on: the dashboard, the day's homelessness, exits, returns to homelessness, and demographics. There's also up here in the upper right, there are 3 kind of system insights that can be explored, and one can delve into those insights in more detail, and we may have time. Didn't intend to increase that. So just coming down the dashboard, it shows the number of households served across our system. This includes emergency shelters, and this is all based on information put into the Homeless Management Information System. We work with NCCH then to upload data from the HMIS into the HDX 2.0, and then Stella P puts these visualizations together. And so people in emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and supportive housing projects that use HMIS all contribute data to this, to their LSA. And so that information is what is summarized here. So we can see that we had 1,155 households, 1,550 people, and look at the days homeless overall, et cetera, et cetera. And you can download, you can click on the details and see more information about any particular section. As we scroll down, you can see the household types is separated out by the days homeless, separated for adult-only households, primarily single adults, but a few adult-only couples presenting themselves, and then adults and children or families. As we know, gratefully, we don't have any child-only households of unaccompanied minors of 17 years old or younger in our system. And then also exits by household type. The percent of households that exited to a permanent destination is reported here. 63 households of adults and children exited, and 65% exited to permanent housing destinations. So there's a quick dashboard, and again, you can do. There's a lot of capabilities to, and that was just a quick overview, right? One other thing to highlight is that on the here, kind of in the midpoint, mid right on the screen, there's an eye which provides information. There's insights which can be accessed here, also can be accessed at the very top of the page by clicking on the insights there. the information on the in the charts can also, some people prefer to see things in a table view. And so you can access the information in a table view by clicking on that. And in a table rather than on a chart. I'm going to go back to the chart view because it gives you a little more visual. The printer icon gives you the opportunity to print that particular visualization if you wish, or print the table if you wish. The challenge with printing is that it's only going to print that particular table or that particular chart. It's not going to print everything on this home page. So if, for example, I wanted to print everything on the dashboard page, I would need to scroll down to system by household type, and again for this particular chart, I'd need to come down again to the next chart. And I think that can be a limitation of the print. And then you can also use the export function to export the particular chart either to an Excel file or to a PDF on your own computer. There's also a trend function under dashboard, which when I click on that, gives me a little different view, and it shows, I'm not sure why it only shows 3 years rather than 4 years, because we do have 4 years of data, but it only shows the homeless trend by household type for 2019, 2020, and 2021. And it may be that it only shows a 3-year trend. We'll have to see if that's the case in next year when we upload the 2022 data, and we'll be able to see that perhaps to see that it only provides a 3-year trend rather than a trend from the when we started inputting data. One of the most interesting things, though, about the dashboard, and I think it's also true of other chapters of what we might call chapters, is what's called the system performance map. And what this chart shows is it shows you how households came through Durham's homeless housing system, how they first entered the system and what happened to them as they progressed through and out of the system. So I'm going to take a few more minutes, I think, to talk us through how to understand this chart. It can be a little complex. But so if we proceed from left to right, as we often read from left to right, we can see that we have 906 households served in the system during the year. And 80% of them started their journey through our system by entering emergency shelter. 728 of 906 is about 80%. But then coming down to this next line, we see that 11% of them went directly, perhaps from unsheltered homelessness, into a rapid rehousing project. These might have been people that were on our by-lane list as unsheltered, and they were prioritized for a rapid rehousing spot, and they went there. And so less than 1% of them went directly from being homeless to permanent supportive housing. But there are a few people that do that, but a very small number. And then 7% of them, again, not a large number, but 7% of 906, I think, was maybe 63 households, entered a transitional housing project. And we know our transitional housing projects are just two of them, basically, Volunteers of America and ATROSA for veterans. So you can say 63 veterans entered those two projects. And then also a small number, 6 households, were all other populations. And we have to really find, I think, in our data which of those 6 households were and exactly what their journey to a permanent destination was, because it's hard to kind of fathom exactly which of those households, or which households that would have been and what their journey was, but a very small number. So that kind of shows where people went when they entered the system. Most emergency shelter, smaller percentage, kind of perhaps significant that a higher percentage of households went directly from homelessness to rapid housing, then went into transitional housing. 7% to transitional housing, but 11% to rapid rehousing. So that could be some good news. And then we look to where did households go when they left emergency shelter. So particularly for that large group of people, right? So it shows 71% went somewhere. They left. Some of them went to 27% went to rapid rehousing. 71% went either back to perhaps unsheltered homelessness or an unknown destination, but 14%, this 14, I think about 30% went to permanent housing destinations. This gets a little confusing in my mind, and I probably need to do more exploring as to exactly what happened here, but 71% exited, some went to permanent housing, and then some went to rapid rehousing, 27%. Another group of people,
So
1%.
Are you thinking, Lloyd, that of those in emergency shelter, that the 71% of those in emergency shelter who did not go to rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, 14 of them did exit to a permanent destination, so therefore through another program?
Yeah,
Is
and
that what you think that's saying?
I think that the other difference is if we look at other information, there's high percentages of people that leave emergency shelter to unknown destinations. We just don't know where they go. But we do see 27% going to rapid rehousing, which is significant. Right. A small group of people go from a shelter to transitional housing, less than 1%. So maybe 5 or 6 households would be less than 1% of 728, and then that's in about 1%. Again, about 7 people went directly from shelter to permanent supportive housing, and altogether 71 plus 27, we know is 98%. 1% is 90, an additional 99, and so that's pretty much describes where everybody went, right? And so similarly, transitional housing, 44% to permanent housing destinations, 56% went to rapid rehousing, and that's everybody from transitional housing, right? And then you come over to rapid rehousing and can do the same thing. So 71% went to permanent housing destinations, another 7% went to it came down to permanent supportive housing, and that is a little unclear what this. I think 71 and 40. It's a little unclear. I need to probably look more closely as for the instructions to how to interpret these percentages and follow the map. Is to understand pathway, you can take out some of the chatter and see more clearly just what happened just with one pathway, right? So that gives us a lot of ability. So that's kind of, again, I think the system performance map really can be very helpful for people to delve into. Now, part of the orientation to this today is also to invite members of the committee, particularly who are interested, to send me an email to lloyd.schmeidler@durhamnc.gov, and I can give you read-only access to HDX 2.0 so that you would not, you could come into the HDX 2.0. I think I have the capability to go to administrator functions and set you up as a user and give you a temporary password, and then you could go in and set up your own profile and explore this further. Not only the system performance map, but other access, other information. Continuing on, then I'm going to briefly look at these kind of 5 chapters, if you will, of Stella P. We look at days homeless. See if it's gonna let me click on that. It seems to be stuck. Okay, now it's loading days homeless, all right? So days homeless has 4 subchapters. There's this overall overview, which we're on now. It's also days homeless by pathway, by population. That is showing, I think, by adults only as compared to adults with children. Our population group is looking at things by age groups. And this can again be challenging people fleeing domestic violence of population groups that have been broken down, and then every ethnicity. So a lot of information about today's homeless. Same menu here for insights that people do, printing it out or exporting the particular chart that you're seeing. So there's lots of capability here. There's a lot of concern in Rome, grateful of places where people go and returns to homelessness. We don't have, I think our rates of returns to homelessness are consistent with other COCs around the country. Less than 20% of people are returning to homelessness, within 2 years. And about half of them, as we talked previously about system performance measures, show that return to homelessness within 6 months. But
Look,
we
we
see
have
from the,
oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a great question from Danielle here. She would like to know if you can break up the data by agency, or is it just by COC community?
this information is strictly by agency. It's not by it is only for the COC as a whole. It is not by agency. We can't do anything. The closest we can get to that is looking at the transitional housing pathway, where we know we only have 2 projects, right, that are in that pathway, and it's all veterans. But even there, it's strictly speaking, just for the
Okay, so it sounds like you can break it up by project type though. Okay.
We can break it up by project type, right? You can look at when you go back to review, you can look at by shelters as compared to rapid rehousing or permanent supported housing. There are communities, I think you can read this for hours on end, probably, and not exhaust all of the different viewing options that we have available.
And then I also interrupted you right when you were talking about returns to homelessness.
Yeah, I was beginning to.
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. If you could repeat that.
I don't think I had actually gotten there, but we looked at where people go when they exit and then returns to the homelessness system. This overall is showing just 4% returns of households that exited in the first 6 months of the reporting period. So this is really a small group of people, of households, I should say, in that what it's looking at is saying with between October 1, 2020 and September 30th of 2021, we're looking at the households that exited in between October 1, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. And then of that group of people, which wasn't many, how many households, 78 households exited of that group of households, how many came back between and had a new episode of homelessness between April 30th, or excuse me, April 1st and September 30th, 2021. So showing that 78 households exited during that period and only 3 came back within the following period. Now, if you look at the households that exited prior to the 2021 fiscal year, so they would have exited at least, I think in the 2019 reporting year, roughly in that time, we see a much larger group of households, 324 households exited, but only 18 or 6% of them had returned to the homeless system during that time. And you can, again, it shows adult-only households as compared to adult and children, and a smaller percentage of families. And then there's the time distribution of as well. We looked at households that exited the 12 months prior. And also look at, again, the 24 months. So returns to, there's a trend line as well, which doesn't show a whole lot. But if we say adult-only households of older people, if we look at unknown destinations, I think if I'm understanding this correctly, looks at people who exited to unknown destinations that then came back into the system after an exit to an unknown destination.
Lloyd, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I think we've got a question from Tracy.
Yep.
Tracy, is that your hand raised?
Okay.
Yes, it is. I think this is really good data in terms of like overall aggregate data. When we're relying upon HMIS to kind of feed that data into the Stellar Performance module. So the HMIS data, or do we as an COC have sort of like the narratives based on like the performance evaluations to kind of give some insight in terms of how the data relates to? It's like, for instance, you're saying for this particular instance, like the number of people who returned to homelessness. we would probably have the information collected from different agencies that would pretty much provide some type of explanation or rationale behind that, to kind of give somewhat of a deeper understanding of the data itself.
Yeah, I think returns to homelessness, unfortunately, Andrea Carey with the data center is not with us. I'm not aware there are reports that can show the returns to homelessness by a particular age. But it's not a table that is included in the annual performance report or the CAPER report, but it can be looked at. The challenge there, I think, is again, many times that the industries, the sample can be pretty small, but to come back to Danielle's question, what can be done is for projects that do use the HMIS, is they could look at this information in Stella and then compare their annual performance report information to some of this information in Stella. And then finally, because I know Analea needs some time as well, I'm going to take the last 5 minutes here to look at demographics, which also has interesting information. I did some analysis of data this morning, and interestingly enough, I was reading on the National Alliance to End Homelessness. One of their blog postings was expressing concern for communities and COCs to be aware of the aging of the overall homeless population, suggesting that over the next several years, we're going to see increasing numbers of people who are elderly experiencing homelessness. Well, this is the portion of Stella where one would look at particularly the demographics. And this is just showing of the people served in shelters and transitional housing, not only the gender breakdown, the age, race and ethnicity, household composition. Here's where we get into, okay, we had adult only households. Yeah, here we had, one person household, 619, 24 two-person households. And again, this is, I think, just all household. Okay, so this is race and ethnicity of head households and adults. So the race and ethnicity of the children is not included in this chart. But we can, if we want to look at it just as for adults and children served in shelter, we can get the see that most of the children are, interestingly, we have a lot more, again, 0 to 5-year-old. This is kind of significant, in our families, even though we're only looking at 0 to 5 years of age, we had 87 children compared to 71 children in the 6 to 17-year-old age group, right? So significantly more very young children being served. But one of the things I looked at this morning was about the aging of Durham's homeless population. I don't know if this comparison is going to show it, but I looked at each of the 4 reporting years, And interestingly, the percentage of our population that was 65 or over in the 2018 period was 3%. In our shelters was 4% for our population as a whole. By 2021, that percentage had increased to 7% in our emergency shelters and 8% for our population overall. So a consistent growth. And similarly, the people in the 55 to 64-year-old age group also had increased from in shelters from 17% of the population in 2018 to fully 20% in 2021. So you know, that trend that people are talking about nationally is also happening with our population in Durham.
Lloyd, does that trend overall for the county relates to that indicator that the population is, you have a significant number of people who are 55 and older who would qualify for senior housing in Durham County?
I would believe that would be true. I would believe that would be true. Okay, so that is kind of out of time. Insights, these are system generated insights that HUD is kind of built into the system. And I invite you to read these at your leisure. You can access these. There's a symbol of an eye for viewing. There's I don't anybody if you I've given you read-only access. The stencil may not be active. It's active for me. And then I think you may be able to access the copies or to save it. But so if you view as an insight, there's a lot more information about that particular insight. For example, this one talks about the exit pathway impact is calculated by tells you how it's calculated, and then it says improving the following pathways would have the greatest impact on the system's overall exits to permanent destinations for all households. And that would be improving exits from emergency shelter for this particular pathway. So the pathway from emergency shelters, not surprisingly, because that's where most of our people are going through, right? So you can explore that as you wish as well, and it's 11:01.
We got one more question from Danielle.
Lots of information. Okay, one last
Go ahead,
question.
Yep, go ahead, Danielle.
Sure. So I just have a clarifying question because it's been some time since I've been in a program that uses HMIS. But you had made a comment earlier that you know, you couldn't do it by program or agency, but for Durham you would know transitional housing because you only have one transitional housing. But if I remember correctly, in HMIS, it doesn't say exit to transitional housing within COC and transitional housing outside of COC, right? Like, because somebody could exit to transitional housing, but it could be a program outside of the COC, correct?
It could. That is correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. The exit destinations in the HMIS are not by agency, but they are by program type, or exit destination type, perhaps more accurately. Right. So.
All right.
All right.
This is
so
really
we're out of time. And again, if anybody's interested in delving more deeply into Stella, I'm very happy to give you read-only access. Just send me an email and I'll set you up as a user. Thank you.
And we can certainly always revisit this again if, you know, during one of our meetings, if there's something particular they'd like to see. So, you know, just let me know as your chair if you'd like to revisit this again at a future meeting, and we can build it back into the agenda. All right. Thank you, Lloyd. All right, Hanalea, hopefully you were able to get back in and be able to share with us. We are ready for your report.
You're muted.
Thank you for letting me know that. All right, let's try this again. This is the third quarter report for coordinated entry for this year. As always, I prepared a much larger compendium of data. I didn't send it out this time around. I actually would appreciate some feedback from the committee on if anyone actually looks at it, because I have sent it out for a couple of years now, and I don't think I have ever gotten a question about it. So trying to get a sense of whether that report is actually being looked at and is useful, or if y'all really just want this abbreviated presentation. So I'll give the presentation, and maybe at the end we can have a conversation about whether that larger data report is still something that y'all want. But here we go. All right, so looking at diversions as a percent of the overall intakes done by entry point, we have essentially seen a flattening of the trends that are sort of neither are at the peak diversion that we had in the fourth quarter of the 2021 year, nor are where we started. So I think we've sort of settled in a very good place that is over the national standards, and seems to be probably where we're going to live, which is about 25% of singles being diverted and about 40% of families. As a reminder, the national standard is 15% for singles and 30% for families. So we've settled in this place that's above the national standard, and seems to be maybe where we'll live. We'll see. But I think we should feel really good about our continuing really strong diversion performance. All right. So as a reminder, one of our goals for our coordinated entry system, oh, Lloyd, did you have a question?
Thank you, Hanalei. I wanted to ask a question about diversion in terms of what the budget or the cost for a diversion, not the personnel cost, but how much like client assistance or household assistance is being provided to households that we're able to divert.
Yeah, I mean, I don't pull that for this report. A while back, we calculated the average cost per housing plan for diversion considering all costs, which I don't think is what you're asking about. That was, my vague memory is 2000 something. The average cost for diversion, if we time, I do have that in another report that I pull for contracting stuff. So I could pull it if maybe we can put a pin in that. And if we have time at the end, I'm happy to pull it. Just want to make sure I get through everything, but that data is available elsewhere. I just don't have it off the top of my head. All right. Okay, so one of our goals of our coordinated entry system is to increase the percent of highly vulnerable clients that have access to shelter. And over the past couple years, we've really seen an increase in one of the ways that we measure this, which is the percent of those with disabilities getting access. We have continued to see the percent of adults with disabilities in family shelter increasing, which is very good news because the families were sort of slow to increase. They've leveled off, so this may be where we end up. If you can see, we've been about the same for the last couple quarters at about 44%. So that is much better than where we started at about 26%. So I think we should feel really good about that. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. On the single side, we did see a bit of a drop off in this past quarter. Not really sure what's going on. It could just be a fluke. could be something deeper going on. Now it's not a drop off to the point of our lowest where we started, which was sort of high 50s, and now we're in mid 60s. But I think it's something to keep an eye on. We would not want to see continued drops. But if you can see, kind of our high point was the fourth quarter of last year, and then we've sort of seen like a little bit of a drop, and now the sort of big one. So something to be, I think, a little bit interested about, and if it continues to be concerned about. Hard to know at the moment what would be causing that. So just something to keep an eye on. The other way, the other way that we look at the vulnerability of folks entering shelter is the percent of those that are unsheltered at entry. Our goal is to have most people that we serve be literally homeless when they enter, not coming from housing. And on this metric, we continue to perform very well. The percent of unsheltered singles entering shelter has just continued to rise. I think we should feel really good about the effectiveness of this metric for singles. When we started our coordinated entry, or before we started it in our old system, we were at about 35% of singles served in shelter were unsheltered, and now we are over 70%. So that is a huge rise. And even in this year, we've gone from around 50 to around 70. So that's really great. And although the rise is smaller for families, we are continuing to see improvements. Just over this past year, we've gone from about 20% of families to about 26%. And that's just this year alone. So I think good news on both the families and single side that we are continuing to improve the targeting of who we serve as really those who are unsheltered before they come into shelter. Great. So this next metric is the percent of clients that exit to permanent housing. And this is all clients throughout the COC. These aren't anyone in the COC. And this, I think, is really important. And this is probably the most important takeaway of the entire presentation, which is that for the first time ever, singles have crossed families, in that a higher percentage of singles exited to permanent housing than families in the last quarter. And that is not a result of a big increase for singles, but a result of a drop for families. This sort of corresponds to, I think, some policy issues that need to be addressed by policy and planning. I'm working on some proposals now. Essentially, what has happened is that for a long time, our rapid rehousing projects were almost exclusively serving families. And we did some work to rebalance that. And I think we overcorrected, because now the vast majority of those, and about 75% of those served in our system are singles. So you would expect the same percent to be served in rapid rehousing, but we're actually at about 90% now of those in rapid rehousing being single. So we sort of overcorrected and gone in the other direction. So I'm working on some rebalancing policies. And I think this is largely, this trend as a result of the imbalance of rapid rehousing slots for families versus singles. So hopefully this is a flag that we need to do some correcting, but it's not a long-term issue that we don't have control over. Any questions about this? Or anything I presented thus far?
I just want you to clarify, this is Tracy. So the number of clients that are identified as single households have exited to permanent supportive housing versus those who are family households. That's what you're saying based on this metric?
So we're not talking specifically here about permanent supportive housing. We're just talking about any permanent housing exit. So a reminder that our goal in our system is to have people exit to permanent housing, not temporary destinations, right? So we're looking across our system at the percent of folks that we serve that exit to permanent housing. And for the first time since I've pulled this reports for 3 years now, a higher percentage of singles exited to permanent housing than families. That in itself is not necessarily a bad or a good thing. The problem here is that it's the result of a drop in family exits, not a result in an increase in singles exits that has caused this flip. And so that drop in families exit is something that we need to be concerned about. And I believe as a result of an overcorrection of too few rapid rehousing slots going to families.
Okay, so it's permanent housing, not permanent supportive housing. And so do those numbers, that demographic also correlate to those who are in shelters who are entering into the system, the number of singles versus family households?
So yeah, so about 75% of those we serve who experience homelessness are singles. So we should expect that about 75% of rapid rehousing slots should go to singles. Right now, about 90% of those slots are going to singles. So we previously had a situation before we corrected where about, if I remember correctly, about 40% of those slots were going to singles. So you can see we wanted to correct, right? We overcorrected and now we need to pull back.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, because I was wondering on the front end of the continuum whether or not what the population looked like versus this particular metric that you're trying to demonstrate with permanent housing. So thank you.
Any other questions?
Finally, you'd say a word about the overall decline in exits to permanent housing, at least the percentage from where we started in Q1 of 2019, 2020. We are
yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a whole lot new to say about this. This is something that this committee, we've been discussing for a while now. I think there's some good news, which is that singles have leveled off. And so I think we should actually feel better about that, for a while now, we actually haven't seen, I mean, we had this one quarter very high, but for a while now we've seen flat or actually a little bit of a rise for singles. It is in families that we see that drop and more recently, and I think we need to be most concerned about, overall the system is struggling with the lack of housing options, particularly landlords pulling out of participating with the COC, and that's been a big issue. But I don't know that there's anything particularly new to say about this that we haven't said before, other than what I mentioned about the family issue.
But I'm sorry,
how far have we?
Leah, I think you said this at the beginning, but these are clients that are exited from our emergency shelter only?
No, this is anyone in the system.
Anyone in the system. Okay, thanks.
I do have again, this is part of that conversation about the data that I shared, the larger report. If people actually are looking at it and want it, the percent that exit from shelter alone is in that report. And that's one of the things that could be helpful if people are actually reading it. So yeah, that is in that report, and I'm happy to also pull that up if we have time and show that to you. All right.
Finally, how far are we with making referrals to the 68 emergency housing vouchers that were allocated?
I would need to pull that up. I was asked about that recently by someone. Was it in the other committee meeting? I think it was 51 out of 68 have been issued, if I remember, something in the 50 range. But our big problem is that we don't have landlords to rent to those folks. So the vouchers themselves aren't doing us a whole lot of good at the moment. All right. So then the kind of the partner metric to this that I like to, I'm sorry, y'all. It looks like I didn't actually update this one, but I can pull this up. This is only Q2. I can pull this up in the actual report itself. And 1 second, sorry about that. While I'm pulling this up, I can also answer any other questions that have come up. All right. So the other metric that I usually pull for y'all into the presentation is the number of actual housing placements, to look at, just how we're doing in terms of like the volume of placements that we're making and how that relates to our permanent housing exits. So if you look here, we have essentially a very steady number of rapid rehousing placements. They're not really going up, but the good news is that they've been steady for the last 3 quarters, compared to the pretty concerning drop that we had the previous fiscal year. We were pre-pandemic, we were, looking at like somewhere in the 40s by quarter. And then once the pandemic started, that dropped into like high 20s. So for the last 3 quarters, we've been in the 50s. So the good news is that we've sort of returned to kind of a more normal number of placements. And we're not seeing any sort of sign of drop in that. Here is what I was talking about for those who want the actual data. So maybe it's not quite as severe as I was implying. 83% of those placed in rapid rehousing in the last quarter were singles. So not quite as severe as 90, which is for some reason the number I had in my head, maybe from the past quarter, but still not where we want to be, right? So if 74% of those in our system are singles, then we would want it to be around 74%. So I do think we need to correct for this number. In terms of placements in permanent supportive housing, I'm sorry, I realize this is really small. I think this is something that we can actually feel really good about. We were seeing maybe 1, 2, or at max 4 a quarter. And I think that the hard work that our PSH providers have done to do move-on plans is really paying off. The last 2 quarters, last quarter we were at 7 placements in permanent supportive housing. This quarter we're at 6. So we are seeing a lot more move through in our permanent supportive housing. And I think a lot of this is the result of long-term move-on planning that's been being worked on for really over a year, in some cases, 1.5 years. And it's finally clients are moving on, and we're getting some new slots in PSH. So that's some good news on that front. That's not high volume. That's not really going to affect the overall numbers of exits to permanent housing. It's too small in terms of percent, but it's important because it speaks to our ability to serve the most vulnerable clients in the system. So as I said, I was hoping, and that was my last metric, so I am hoping there's some time to have some feedback from the committee about this sort of larger report, and whether this is something that anyone is looking at, if y'all want to continue receiving it, if it's just not really, it's just too much information. And as well, if there's anything from this report that I'm not pulling into the big presentation that y'all want. For instance, Sally, you asked about exits specifically from shelter. So I can show you where in that report that is. So you can see here from shelter specifically, 11% of singles exited to permanent housing. So that's a fairly stable metric. Essentially, that's essentially where it's been for a while now. For families, this is what we were talking about the drop. So we're at 17%. The previous quarter, we were at 21, still slightly up from the first quarter of the year that it was 15. But that's compared to, if you look at these numbers the previous year, 31%, 31%, 41%, 47%. So that's quite a bit lower. And I think something that we really need to focus on is the drop for families. And I do think if we correct for the rapid rehousing issue, that will help. But yeah, so that information is in here. I can pull that into the report itself if that's something folks want. I do also have a lot of data in here about length of stay for individual shelter providers that could be useful for folks to look at. So just kind of looking for some feedback about, is this report continuing to be useful for y'all? And is there anything that I'm not pulling into the big presentation that y'all would like to see?
I think this is good information. I'm always interested outside of the numbers to pull back the layers around some of the, I don't know if it's captured during the coordinated entry process or in HMIS or any other platform, to kind of have some rationale behind the numbers other than seeing it quantitatively and, you know, chart it, to see the trends, to kind of give some insight as to, like, when you were speaking about the number of singles versus family households, I just wonder whether or not those trends correlate with other things that are going on within our economy or our housing industry within the Durham County, or just the Chapel Hill, Orange County, MSA area in general. So.
Yeah, I would say for me, in terms of helpful, I always appreciate your presentation, because it helps with the interpretation of the data. I mean, certainly it's great to have, you know, an Excel spreadsheet like this, but your interpretation and, you know, condensing of it, I think kind of helps me get the bigger picture. So I value that the most.
I would say that, you know, I'd love to, you know, just get a copy of the spreadsheet. I don't know that I would, you know, request that you know, make a, you know, special new slides or anything. You know, I think I could just read the spreadsheet to see any of the data points that I was looking for.
Okay, that's good to know, Sally, because I was wondering if anyone is actually wanting to read the spreadsheet or if I'm just sort of sending it out into the ether. So that's helpful to know that that at least someone, maybe a few people actually do want to read the data. I'm happy to send that out. Like I said, I didn't because I had just gotten back and some time constraints, but yeah, I will send that out after this meeting. And as always, if anyone has any questions about anything that's in the spreadsheet that you don't understand or you have questions about, or again, if you look at the spreadsheet and you say that, hey, this is really interesting, why aren't you presenting on this metric? I think that would be useful. Always appreciate feedback, but yes, I will send this out.
Anything else for Hanalea? All right, well, thank you as always, Hanalea, and we'll look forward to your next quarterly report. And I'm sure if anybody does have any questions that they think of later on, they can reach out directly to Hanalea. All right, so we are rapidly reaching the end of our meeting here. I do have a couple of announcements before we adjourn. So tomorrow, Lloyd and I are going to be leading a seminar on an introduction to the newly adopted benchmarks that this committee passed and were adopted to by the larger HSAC. So I imagine we may see some of you all there. If you had not been planning to come, you are welcome to come, certainly as representatives of this committee. The other thing is I am going to be away from the office for most of June, and I do need someone who is willing to chair June's meeting of the Performance Management Subcommittee. Is there anybody who might be willing to do that? I will certainly prepare an agenda ahead of time, send it out. But if there is anybody who is willing to do that, please let me know.
I also will be gone in June.
Okay, so Sally will be gone as well. All right. Are there any other announcements or concerns that anyone has? Okay. In that case, if someone would kindly make a motion to adjourn followed by a second, then we'll go ahead and adjourn, and we'll see you all, of course, at the next HSAC meeting next week.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, Sally has made the motion to adjourn.
I second it.
And we have a second from Tracy, and I think probably a third from Drew. So we are adjourned. Thank you all for your time and attention today and your good work, and we'll see you next week.